Okay, this video is going to start our course on Civil 3D and following essentially doing a basic um, design for a bridge project. So replacing a bridge and kind of going through that full setup um, from start to finish essentially, outside of doing the actual hydraulics and what that looks like. Um, some of this will be very specific to how we do things, um, but it provides a good general overview um, either way. So the first thing we need to do is essentially create our project folder and a couple things that go along with that. How we have things set up, um, what you should be doing every time is you have on your C drive, create a Civil 3D projects folder. We'll talk about the Civil 3D projects templates later, but essentially that's part of the reason if we have this folder set up, then everybody's projects kind of work together as long as they're saved within here. And a lot of the templates and things source this folder. So within this Civil 3D projects folder, you'll want to create your specific project folder. In this instance, we're going to use the IO06. Now, you can name it whatever you want. We'll just need to be able to retain those names throughout throughout this process. So we open that up. Now I've already got things kind of built into this a little bit, but we haven't created our design base file yet. And we'll talk a bit more about some of this later. So as long as you've got your project folder in here, what we first need to do is essentially basically create a shortcuts folder within that project folder through Civil 3D, and that will allow all of our Civil 3D objects that we create throughout the design process to kind of be dumped in there and be able to be shared easily throughout different drawings and for different people. So what we want to do is just open up a new CAD drawing, just base. Now again, this stuff, some of the stuff when I open up, some of these templates and things are specific to what we do, but that's I'll get you set up with that later. What we need to do is open up the tool space over here, and if you see down here we have data shortcuts. So on your home tab you open the tool space, and then now we're down to data shortcuts. So if we just right click on this top one, so we don't want to create data shortcuts yet. We want to create a new data shortcuts project folder. So this pops up, and so our working folder is C Civil 3D projects. Now that's kind of set up, and our template, if we follow our setup guide, that's kind of how where everything is sourced from. Okay, and so what we need to do here in the name is we need to go back into here, and this has to be copied exactly the same. That we need this, that exact thing. Okay, and now we can set that here, and if you mess this up at all, it'll essentially create a new project folder and a new shortcut folder within it. So if we do this, it'll be okay. So we'll hit OK. Okay, so now our data shortcuts, let's see if we can scoot this out, is right here. Now it's verified that it created this. Let's go back to our project folder, and now we see this underscore shortcuts folder. And it did go ahead and populate it. There's nothing in any of these folders, but these are all our Civil 3D objects for which we can create shortcuts and dump into there. Okay. And basically later, as we're going through, and I'll show you this in the next step, we'll need to associate each drawing that we open to that shortcuts folder. Okay, um, so I'll show you that in just a second once we create our survey base. Um, but essentially, what you'll do is right click and then associate this project to the current drawing. Okay, and that references this. So any object you create will dump into that shortcuts folder as long as you assign it. Okay, so that's the first step in starting um, our new Civil 3D project. The second step is, let's take a look at our survey. Um, on Bigger, you don't necessarily have to do this step, but it's helpful to create a separate file that is our survey base file. And then we can just reference that as we go. I think we've had a video before talking about XREFs, external references. But essentially the idea is that you can create a drawing and then in a separate drawing get all that information kind of in the background, and it keeps the objects and different things, but you can't manipulate it too much. It's more just there for reference. Um, so when we get surveys, and this may not be standard across the board, I've already put these in. I always create a just survey folder. We open that up, and when our surveyor sends us surveys, we get a drawing file which has all the 2D line work and all the information in it, and then we get a LandXML file, which is actually going to be the topographic surface. So it's a Civil 3D object surface here. So before we do too much and create our survey base, we just want to look at our file. And this is something you should do pretty much anytime you're opening your Civil 3D drawings, is open them with Recover. And this helps to look through your drawing and see if there are any errors inside of it. Sometimes, and it's not something necessarily you did wrong, but the way it computes it, the way some of these objects are created, maybe there's some errors, and this helps clean that up. For whatever reasons, so our survey files normally have some errors associated with them. So we want to clean those up before we create a survey base that we're basing our whole design off of. So anytime you want to open with Recover, you need to just start Civil 3D, just blank screen. Don't open the project file directly. Just open Civil 3D. Then we can go to File and Recover. Now it looks exactly the same. We can just open our drawing file. So we want to go to the survey, and then here is our survey file. So it's running the audit in the background. Now this one had quite a lot of errors, and they fixed them, and sometimes it erases object, but most of the time these are just kind of background things. They're not needed. Okay, so given the amount of errors there, we definitely wanted to recover this, and we need to save it once we've recovered it so it maintains the fixed status. So now that we've opened that, we're just going to go ahead and save that with that recover. And so we can just take a look and make sure we have all the things we need. So normally we have our blue lines, our section corners, which they'll label. These blue lines are the boundaries, section boundaries with bearings. Section corners here. Any benchmarks they have locations and elevations. Over here we'll have the description of each of these benchmarks, your coordinate system, and projections. And then we'll look through here. So here's all the 2D line work. So he's got all the contours as 2D objects, polylines. We've got specific points they shot, the labels for all the contours, labels for the bridge, etc. Fence lines, normally edge of pavement, any utilities that they found. They're not doing GPR or anything to find these. It's just whatever they can find, either overhead or just sticking out of the ground. And so that's our basic survey. Normally you'll see this is on the tree line. So that's our basic survey. And then he'll normally also, last thing, he'll put in the statutory right-of-way, which does vary between different counties and different regions of Oklahoma, so just keep that in mind. Most of eastern Oklahoma is 24.75, but over here is 33. So that's somewhat helpful if we can put these roads back on section. So I'm going to save this again, and now that we have saved this, what I like to do, just to verify that there's no more errors in there, I'm just going to open it back up with Recover and see what happens. And this is what it should say each time, hopefully. And so now I'm going to exit out. I just wanted to verify there was nothing, no errors left in there. So now we're on to actually creating our survey base. And so this will be our base file. So we'll put the survey information in there and save it. And then we will reference this file for any of our Civil 3D design files. So we're just going to open a brand new file. That worked. There we go. New drawing file. So we'll go down here to model. So even though we could open the survey drawing file directly and source it, sometimes it's just easier to put it. When the surveyor sends it to us, their drawing file has all of their standard layers and styles, but it doesn't include all of our layers and styles. And so sometimes that's one of the reasons we will create our own survey base, because with our template that has all of our layers and all of our styles built in, and it just makes things a lot cleaner. So there's two things we need to do. First, we need to insert their base drawing as a block, and then we will also need to insert their XML surface file. So first we're going to insert their survey drawing. So we just hit I for insert, and if you're using the newer versions of CAD, it brings up this little odd box, which I really don't like. They used to have the whole dialog box. So a couple of things we want to make sure are unchecked is we want to uncheck the insertion point, because we want it to just drop at 0, 0. When you bring in the block, it's georeference. It knows where it needs to go. So if you uncheck that, the scale needs to remain the same, rotation, all that stuff. But we do want to check the explode box. And essentially what exploding is when you bring this in as a block, you're bringing in the entire drawing essentially as one thing. But when you explode it, it blows it back up into its own individual items, individual polylines, etc. So now we need to come up here, I believe it's this one, and navigate to the file. Okay, so now we find this box we're used to. So we're still in Iowa 6 survey, and see, it only provides the option to bring in a drawing file here. So we hit open. Okay, now we brought it in, but where is it? So again, when you open a basic CAD drawing, this corner right here is set to 0, 0. So depending on your coordinate system, where that drawing put it in, which is georeference, is a long ways away from 0, 0. So the easiest way to find it is to zoom extent. So we hit Z and E for extent. Again, nothing. And this is something that is unique to our surveyor, and I'm not sure why. But if you notice here, there's a big group of something over here, and if we zoom in, that looks like our survey. But zooming back out, there's something over here, way over here. And most times it's just a tiny dot, and I'm not sure what exactly this is, but based on its location, I think it's something about this is the location of their office or something similar, and it always drops a point there. So when you zoom extents, it pulls the entire extent between that point and your survey. So I just go in and delete these points because they're not relevant. And now if we rezoom extents, we're back to our survey area. So that's just kind of a unique feature. When we get our surveys, it's not a big deal, but it's probably not a standard thing across the board. So what I do now, normally I'm going to go ahead and go save, since I've done some work. And I don't want to save this in the survey file folder. I want to save it in the main folder. And the way I like to call any drawing associated with the project, you have the project name, space, a little dash, and then type what it is. I use all caps, just, that's the way a lot of the style of the text is in AutoCAD, and I get used to it. It just looks nicer to me. But we just want to have a project number and survey base, however style you want to do that. So we're going to save that. Now, thinking about the fact that we just created a project that has a name, let's go down here that we talked about earlier and go ahead and associate this project, or associate this drawing essentially, to that project. Okay, so again, our working folder, that our Iowa 06 project. Good. So now essentially this project is referenced in that shortcut folder if we did create objects. So now one thing, we can go in and we can maybe clean this drawing up a little bit. When we bring in, this is an XREF, we probably don't need all the contours as polylines and the labels, because we can do that specifically with the surface. We probably don't need all these individual elevation points as well. So if we go into our layers and freeze, let's just freeze some of these topo lines and then freeze these points. And that makes things a little bit cleaner, and just be able to see what we're actually really looking at. So I'm going to save that again. So, and you can do this however you want. You can change colors to whatever makes sense to you. So the next thing I want to do is bring in the actual XML file. And to do that, it's a little bit different, because the I command, which was insert, right? But that's only for inserting blocks. So you can actually go to the insert tab up here, and I could have just hit insert block, in a similar way. But I generally choose to use shortcut keyboard commands, except for some of the newer civil objects that I just don't know what it's called. So what we want to do is import a LandXML file. So we come up to import LandXML. And again, this one's a bit more straightforward. So navigate to our Iowa 6 project folder, survey, and now it just shows up this one XML file. And that's what we want. Leave all this checked. Just hit OK. So this is something that we'll see throughout as we create Civil 3D objects and stuff, is this new panorama dialog box. And essentially anytime you do something with Civil 3D objects, this will pop up, and it's kind of a log of what you did. And it will tell you any errors or notes relative to that. Most of the time, it's not a big deal. Just get rid of it, click out of it. But every once in a while, you'll have errors that you actually need to deal with. So we'll just close that. Now, I don't see a surface. There's nothing in here. But the one new thing now is this boundary. And if we click on it, we look at our properties, you look, this is actually a 10 surface. But what we can do is go to our surfaces, verify that it came in, right click, and we can go to surface properties, And now we can change the style. Sometimes the standard style is just border only. And this is another reason why we want to bring this into our own drawing with our own templates, because we have more of these styles that we can look at. So I like to do just the 1 in 5 contour background just to verify what it looks like. And again, this is similar to the contours we had before, but now kind of in a bit more of a background view to it. The nice thing about having a surface instead of just having the contours is now when you hover, it will tell you your exact elevation at that point based on the surface. So you can kind of move around and get an idea. And again, that's why you don't need to have those specific elevation points throughout. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So another thing I like to do on the survey is, depending on your preferences in the survey properties, is changing the name. Now, sometimes this is the only goofy name you have in there, so you just know that's the survey. But sometimes we want to just reference and have everybody know what that means. So if we say, let's call it Iowa 06, and then we'll just say EG for existing ground, or you can say topo or something like that. But we change the name right there, and that really helps a lot in being able to, for everyone, whoever uses your design or looks at it, to be able to identify it. Another thing that's helpful is when we first bring this in, everything's on the 0 layer a lot of times when you bring things in. But your 0 layer can be used for a lot of different things, and I always like to turn the surface onto a separate layer. So we can either do that over here or different places. So I like to put it on, so the V's are generally for survey. I put it on V site scan, and it's a similar color, similar styles, and in that way it's not clogging up your 0 layer and can mess with some different things. Okay, so the next thing, kind of the last thing we need to do here, is now that we've brought all this in, this exists in a 2D space right now, and it has essentially coordinates or locations tied to it, but these locations are just numbers that they don't really mean anything right now. So anytime you want to define the XY of any of these locations, it's not tied to anything directly. So what we need to do is actually set the coordinate system. Now again, you can find that here in the surveyor's notes. Within Oklahoma, they always do a state plane coordinate system, and essentially until they update it, are always using the NAD 83 2011 datum. But there's only 2 state planes in Oklahoma. There's a north and there's a south. So this one's in the north zone. So once we've done that, what we need to do is go to the settings, and then up here within the project name, we right click and edit drawing settings. So very first tab is units and zone. So what we want to do is change the zone here. So first thing, we're going to go, and it's kind of confusing the naming systems here, but within the categories, here's the basic, all the different projections and coordinate systems you can use. So what we want to do is scroll down, and this is just kind of generic the way AutoCAD organizes these things, which is completely different than what you would see in like a GIS. But we want USA, Oklahoma. And basically now we have available coordinate systems to pick from. And again, there's still quite a few within there. But what we're actually looking for, and again, the naming is a little bit different, but we want the NAD 83 datum, we want Oklahoma State plane, and we want north, but if you'll notice there's a north zone meter and US foot. We want to do it in US feet. So we click that one there, and then now we can hit OK, and nothing happens. Except it did. One thing to note, when you set a coordinate system, if you look up top, we have a new tab that popped up, and it's called geolocation. And this is a really handy tool, and it's a good reason to always set your coordinate system. You don't 100% have to, because everything is still relative to that coordinate system as far as X and Y, but as long as it's a small area. But this will allow you to bring in aerial imagery, or even just, base roadway imagery into your drawing. And I always like to do that, especially after I set the coordinate system, just to verify this looks right. So if you come up here, there's all these different options, but as far as your online map, and you have to be on the internet, hooked up to the internet for these to work. So come down, and there's different options. You can do the road map, a hybrid of aerial and road, or just the aerial. So I'm just going to click on that for now and give it a second. And see, now we have an aerial image. So for one, it looks like it's pretty much in the right place. We zoom in, there's a creek, there's a bridge, and that's pretty much where we need it to be. Now, as with any georeferenced object, things might be off a little bit. It's hard to say exactly based on an aerial image, this is exactly where things are or aren't. But again, we're not designing based on this aerial image. We're designing based on the survey, which is exact. The aerial image is there to provide us with just a background, with an idea of what it looks like. And so it's a good check for one, to make sure you put the right coordinate system in, because if you accidentally hit meters or you hit the south zone, this is going to send you somewhere completely different. But again, sometimes it's very nice to be able to look and see, maybe the surveyor missed something. You see there's actually guardrail down here. Maybe there's actually somebody has built a house or taken down a house or something. So it's always good to just see this and check, because sometimes we're not able to go out in the field and verify some things, so it's just always good to take a look and check here. So we're going to turn that off for now, and I'm actually going to turn the surface off, or at least to no display, because I want to be able to control that in the actual design file. And if you leave it turned on in the survey file, when you XREF that, it will always stay on. So we've got that in there. And the one last thing we need to do is in our data shortcuts. So we have a shortcuts folder, but we don't have anything in the shortcuts folder. But now that we have a Civil 3D object, we can put that in the shortcuts folder and be able to use it for any drawing within that is associated to that folder. So if we right click here, and I'm now going to create a data shortcut, not a folder, create a data shortcut. And what it'll do is essentially say these are the Civil 3D objects that exist in this drawing, and you can click which ones do you want to create shortcuts for. All we have is this surface, so I'm going to click OK, or hit checkbox, and now hit OK. And now we see down here under the shortcuts, we actually have our surface built in. And we'll see in later videos why that's relevant, but essentially that's what we needed to do in this step. And so basically that's it. We've created our survey base file. Let's save that. And now we can move forward to creating our Civil 3D design file, or our base file. and we'll start by bringing this survey base into the file, and then we can go from there. So that's it for this video.